Hi, Prem. You can unmute if you want, just to say hi.
Hi, Christopher.
Hey, Prem. How are you?
Yeah, fine. How is it going? So,
Ex- Excellent. Prem, do you want to just introduce yourself real quick?
yeah, sure. I'm currently a student in Boston studying my master's in project management and clinical trial design in Northeastern. And I am looking for similar roles related to clinical data management and clinical research. So I got interested in the webinar and so I joined.
Excellent. Yeah. So, well, welcome. We appreciate you joining. This is really it's meant more as just so you know it as a casual evening conversation. Um, and Heather and I hosted. This is our third one that we're doing. It is being recorded, just so you know, and then we do share it on social media afterwards. Um, so I just want to make sure you know that before you start talking too much.
Sure.
Yeah,
Excellent.
sometimes we have 10 people, sometimes we have the two of us. It just depends on what everybody's doing that day. But either way, once a month we get together and pick a topic and chat a little bit. Sometimes we have a guest so if there are any questions you have around the industry and sort of your job search and understanding more around data management, we're always happy to answer any questions.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's still early. So, Heather and I just usually chat. Right now, I think there are 20 people registered. We usually get half as many than we have registered. So we'll kind of see who joins in. Um, but yeah, the last one we did in August was on pharmacovigilance.
Oh, sure. Yeah.
And we had our guest speaker was Homira from a company, a CRO here in Canada called JSS Research.
Oh, sure. Yeah.
And so we went pretty deep on um, on pharmacovigilance and risk management.
So, what are the expectations? Like, what can I learn from this webinar? Like, it's mainly focused on tools, or uh, mainly focused on the process of the clinical data?
Yeah, so there's no structured format. There's a bunch of tools that I'm going to talk about a little bit. Um, and if there are specific questions that you have, then you can ask us, and we'll do our best to answer. I am curious to know a little bit more about the program that you're in and what software, data management tools that you guys are using, in the studies that you're doing.
And we might have lost audio. Prem, that's okay
Yeah,
though.
yeah. So, I have a weak internet connection. Sorry for that.
Oh no, that's
Uh,
fine.
so,
Yeah. So
so
when I said studies, I mean in your school. Are you guys using like tools like Open Clinica or what was the other one, Heather? Open Clinica,
RedCap?
RedCap.
if we are totally into the just like basic clinical research stuff. I actually worked back in India on Medidata and review Medidata,
Right.
so Rave. So
Okay.
I'm familiar with those.
Okay. And when you were in India, what companies were you working for? What were you doing that caused you to have access to Rave?
Oh, I actually worked in a company called Cognizant, where I manage clinical data using for the oncology studies, oncology study, and it's a phase 3 study I handle,
And
and
you already
it's
know what you're doing.
yeah, and I actually want to learn more about the future of it's more totally into analytics right now, based upon data and all. So what's the future regarding the clinical data management?
Uh,
Yeah, it's a good question. It's something we talk about a lot because a lot of times we find that there's sort of a mentality when it comes to thinking about, you know, sponsors thinking about it and CROs thinking about it, and sort of when it comes to selecting a data platform, it's often either how do I just not get what I had before that I didn't like, or how do I try and solve for these problems that I had the last time without sort of opening up the mindset to saying, okay, is what could I have if I wanted anything I could have, and what would that be, and what that conversation looks like. And there's so many interesting things happening in the space right now that I think that there's so much more we can do with technology, that I think a lot of times there's a bit of a limited sort of a limited mindset to that, not for anybody's fault at all, but just that sort of the industry has been a little slow in adopting all the really neat technology adaptations into our industry that we really could. So that's somewhere that we get really excited about doing that kind of stuff.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah.
Yeah, and not only slow, but part of the problem is on the one hand, there aren't necessarily the innovative tools being released
Yeah.
right now. But
And
when
we
there
are-
are, sorry, go ahead, Prem.
No, I'm actually saying the science field is always the late adopters of the technologies.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. And I was saying you know, if there is a new tool that comes out, oftentimes it's a tool that's complementary to the clinical trial database, and they'll release it's an MVP, a minimum viable product. So it works, but it may only connect into one EDC platform. So it works, but it's only relevant to a very small segment of pharma companies that might be using, you know, that complementary tool. Like it may only be tied into Rave, for example. So that's, you know, this lack of interoperability is a challenge for the industry. So you may find a really great tool that you want to use, except it doesn't work with the other tool or tools that the company's adopted. That's part of the problem we're seeing right now.
Sure, yeah. So what, according to you, is the best tool in the present market?
I don't know. That's an interesting question. I don't know if there's one best tool. You know, there are a variety of platforms to do very, very different things. But the challenge is in understanding, you know, what you need for your specific company, right? And how those tools fit within your existing workflow.
Yeah, definitely, yeah.
So we have Heba
Hi, Heba. Hi, Yan.
and
Slowly
Yan. Yan's still
connecting.
dialing in.
Yeah.
Hello, everyone. Nice to
Hello.
meet
Yeah,
Hey,
nice to
Heba.
see you. Yeah, we were just talking a little bit about sort of industry adoption in this field can be challenging when it comes to technology, and the process of changing thinking about, you know, being more open-minded and optimistic about what you could have versus sort of well, I guess we've got these 3 or 4 options and we're just going to have to pick something that might be the lesser of all evils. And there's so much more out there right now in our industry. It's neat, actually. I mean, it's unfortunate that COVID has forced us to this point, but the adoption of innovations due to decentralization and virtual trials is really, I think, going to be a really interesting driver over the next sort of 6 to 18 months of what happens in this industry. So it's exciting.
Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely. You know, and unfortunately, the pandemic isn't going away anytime soon. And, you know, existing studies that were perhaps delayed are now having to refactor themselves, find new sites that in other geographies to try and continue running. And then, you know, look at other technologies like telemedicine, for example, to try and keep those patients from deviating the protocol and dropping out, and keep them, you know, keep the study going. So this is going to just continue for the next couple of years, I think, at least. And then I don't even think then it's gonna fall back to where it was before before March, before all this happened. I think it's just going to continue. So we're gonna see a much broader adoption of these tools.
Yeah, and and the process will be interesting because I'm seeing companies that we're going to keep what we have, but we want to augment things on, which is what Chris was saying earlier about the whole concept of does the round hole square peg sort of bolt new things on work, or are companies willing to be innovative and flexible enough to say, is now the time to rethink everything that we have sitting out here and see if there's something that could be better here. Are we solving for little problems along the way, or are we saying, okay, what do we want to be doing in 5 or 10 years from now, and how can we change what we're doing right now? So it's interesting to see what's happening in terms of data management tools right now. And one of the things we recently, I'm not sure if anybody else was involved, but the SCDM conference was on this week, and today was the last day. And one of the things that came up was, how are we integrating what patients are doing, and how is that communication between patients and site evolving to be much more interactive and much more almost like a social media interaction, where they've sort of got apps and ways to connect and talk. And there's so many interesting things that are happening in the space. So for those who have sort of recently joined us, welcome. And we're just talking a little bit about what's happening in the industry and what data management tools are going to look like as we move forward.
So Jan and Kurt have been here before, so they know the drill. Prem, we already explained it to, but for you, Hiba and Anna, this is this series that we're doing, that Heather and I are hosting, it's a casual conversation, and once a month, we pick a topic, and then we all just talk and ask questions. So we are recording it. We're going to make it available through social media afterwards. But it really is meant to be, a conversation. So as much as we have some things that we want to talk about with you guys, if there are questions that you want to ask us about anything, right now we're talking about data management tools, but anything about clinical trials and research or anything like that, just ask away.
Okay.
So if you don't mind, I'll put you on the spot just slightly, Hiba. Do you mind introducing yourself and letting us know what you do?
Sure. I'm a clinical research scientist at Biological and Chemical Analysis. It's basically a lab where we test sunscreens in vivo and in vitro to determine the right SPF.
Okay.
And yeah, that's pretty much it.
Nice. And I obviously you're here. Excuse me. What caught your interest in the meeting?
I'm very interested in clinical research in general. Before, I used to study pharmacy in Lebanon, but when I came to Canada, I switched to biochemistry, but I'm still very interested in biochemistry and the pharma area, all of it. So when I got in clinical research, I really loved it, and I'm planning to develop my skills. So I studied GCP. I know everything. I'm familiar with the clinical data management and the documentations, LCOA, and I want to develop myself more in that aspect.
Excellent. That's fantastic.
Mm-hmm.
We and Anna, if you don't feel obligated, Anna, if you want to introduce yourself, you can. Otherwise, you can just keep listening. TrialStat, our parent company is called Jubilant Life Sciences. And it's an Indian life science and pharmaceutical company, and one of our sister companies under Jubilant is a company called Biosys, and they do a lot of preclinical work. We're not involved in that part, but from time to time we hear about the preclinical toxicology work they do, with lab animals and things like that. So it's something we are somewhat familiar with, but not directly involved in. So Heather was saying she was talking about SCDM. SCDM is the Society for Clinical Data Managers, and every year they do a really big event. We typically exhibit there in person. This year it went virtual, just like so many other meetings that we were supposed to exhibit at this year. But this year it went virtual, and it was a really, really good meeting. I was really surprised. The technology they actually brought together in a very short period of time was fantastic, and they managed to make sure that everyone that was speaking was comfortable and was able to focus on the topics. And there were quite a few interesting technologies that were out there. There were, of course, a bunch of electronic data capture platforms that were there exhibiting. There was a company that we're familiar with called Adaptive Clinical, and they actually are a platform for connecting different systems together. So they call it their eClinical bus, and bus as in like a computer bus. And they're basically a platform that lets you connect into other systems, like if you've got, if you're doing some work with an institution and they're using Epic as their electronic medical records, they have a connector for Epic. And so you can connect through Adaptive and get data out of that site's Epic EMR system, and vice versa. You can use it to put data onto their framework and then move data into a third-party system. So that's interesting, because what we were talking about with Prem earlier was part of the challenge that the clinical data management industry is faced with is not only the creation of new tools, but the adoption of them. So there's new software will come out, and they do what's called a minimum viable product. So it's the least amount of functionality that they can get to make it work, and then they release it so that they can start getting some customers. And there's a data, it's a data management platform for reviewing data in a clinical trial. And the demo looked fantastic. Like the tools and the reporting and the functionality looked fantastic. But the only electronic data capture platform that it integrated with at this time is a platform called Medidata Rave. So that tool would be great for a data management team, but it currently only works with one EDC technology. And so if you're a big company like an IQVIA or something like that, that might make sense. But if you're anything smaller than that, the odds of you having a lot of your studies on Medidata Rave are slim. You'll probably be using a whole host of other tools. And so that, getting these systems to talk to one another is a challenge. And I think that's holding the industry back definitely a lot. The other tools that we saw that we're really interested in, and I'm not sure if anybody's had a chance to go and look at the TrialStat website, but TrialStat it's a data management platform for running clinical trials from feasibility studies, so preclinical, all the way through phase 1, 2, and 3 into post-marketing, as well as medical device studies and diagnostics and basically anything in between. So it's a data management platform. But what we often look at are what are the additional third-party either devices or software that we can integrate into our platform to help facilitate the continuation of studies, particularly right now. We were doing it before. We were interested in running decentralized trials, for example. But now it's even more important. And there's devices, for example, that do that control the dispensation of medication inside of a patient's home. And not only that, but some of these devices that we've been looking at, they're about the size of maybe a small shoebox, and on the front it's got a nice LCD screen. And so it's based on the clinical trial protocol. It'll prompt the patient in their home, both with a visual prompt and an audible prompt, that it's time to take their medication. And so they hit the dispense button, and it dispenses the medication. So that, and then once they've taken their medication, then it can do an ePro, like a patient-reported outcome, where it asks them some questions about how they were feeling. So it does all of these things, and then it sends the data back to the device manufacturer's sort of cloud environment. We're interested in getting that data into the clinical trial, and so we're talking to companies like that to gather this metadata and bring it in. But those device companies aren't actively looking for partners. And again, so that's somewhere where the challenge is, in trying to get everybody to work together and really start kind of breaking down the silos and getting this data to work together.
And I know you joined us, and again, like Chris said, don't feel like you have to jump in, but I did want to make sure that we left a little space here on the off chance you do want to say hello and let us know a little bit about you. Please feel free to jump in, but there's certainly no pressure.
Sure, yeah. So my name's Anna. I'm working in California, actually.
Okay.
But as you can probably tell from my accent, I'm originally from the UK. So I worked kind of on the site side and academia in the UK for about 8 years. And then I moved to California last year for my husband's work. And since then I've moved over to working on the commercial side. Currently working as a senior CTA at the moment in ClinOps within oncology.
Oh, fantastic.
Yeah.
Great.
Excellent. Thank you, Anna.
And you are safe and well. You're nowhere near the fires that are going on right now.
Oh boy. Yeah.
Yeah, it hasn't been great here, to be honest.
Yeah.
Yeah. But we're okay. We're okay. We're safe. But,
Yeah,
Thank
good,
goodness,
good.
yeah.
Yeah, it's a weird time with everything that's going on, and it certainly heightens everybody's it can make it a little bit difficult to kind of get things done. I think it is a factor in how people are feeling about when they think about even workplace decisions like this. Sometimes it's nice just to stick with what's safe because it's a little bit there's a lot of other things going on right now, but I'm glad. That's good to know.
Are most of the members of this group from Canada, or?
Yeah.
It's fairly mixed. I think it's still skewed predominantly Canadian just because it's here. But it's a bit of a mixed bag. And this is only our third time doing it, so the audience has been growing.
Yeah, it's new, we might have 10 people, we might have 3 people. We're just sort of dipping the toe in the water, and we're going to keep doing it because, we think that there's value in it, and we get a lot of interesting, great ideas and good conversation from people, and we miss seeing humans out there and just talking about this stuff. So, yeah, we're going to keep doing it, but I think it'll grow, and we have had folks, I think, no, I don't think anybody from, Europe or overseas yet, mostly North America. But we talked a little bit about sort of the timing and when might work better for more of a, bigger audience, as it were. But until it grows, we're just going to kind of keep it small, and hopefully everybody can get a little something from the conversation, or at least have a laugh or two and get to say hello for a few minutes.
Well, and the thing is, like we were saying earlier, we just wrapped up the SCDM conference, the virtual one. And it literally right now we would be in the hotel bar talking to all our colleagues, having a conversation like this. We'd be deep in conversations around what happened at the meeting, but both Heather and I were missing these conversations because we used to do, 2-3 meetings a month at the peak, and now we're doing none.
Yeah, and one of the things that, one of the mindsets when it comes to our company is about how we iterate on the product that we have and our platform, and what we do is a lot of that stuff comes from those conversations with folks like you guys. Anna, you were saying, you're working with you're working on the sponsor side, and, HIP is coming from the sort of preclinical space. There's so much about the transition of that data all the way from the very beginning, all the way through to the end, and that sort of post-marketing work. All along that space, there's so many people with really great ideas, and if you don't iterate your platform, you really end up with something that gets a little stagnant. And again, like Chris was saying, at some point, the only thing you can do is bolt on new things because it's kind of set in its place. And we certainly don't ever want to be that with what we do. So this kind of conversation is really kind of bringing all that great stuff that comes from having those casual conversations into a quick hour little chit chat, and hopefully we all get to take a little something back from it if there's anything that we were looking to learn, and we always learn from everyone who joins us about interesting things we might want to think about as we grow what we do. Yeah,
and another one of the challenges from a technology perspective that the data management field is faced with is the technology itself is regulated, obviously, and so generally speaking, to make a change to a data, it's very expensive because you have to revalidate the platform, and when you start looking at, larger platforms like, pick on Medidata, why not? They change their software very, very, very slowly, like on the order of years before they release new versions. And, anybody who's using their software over the years starts to get frustrated with the lack of features, because they'll go to a conference like SC, and they'll see all of these new tools that are out there, and they wish they had them. So there's a big issue with that. And as Heather was saying, we recognized that early on when we were designing our software, and we're able, the way we designed it is that our core EDC technology is a very tight piece of code, and those core features are validated, but we can do a lot of customization on the periphery of that, including user experiences and new functionality, where we only have to revalidate that new functionality. We don't have to revalidate our whole platform. And so we release new features every quarter, and so that,
or every month lately.
also that, yeah, we do point updates where we may release a tiny new feature. So it does make the data managers that use our software, it makes their life a lot easier, because the features that they wish they had 3 months ago, they're getting now, because they spoke with us and we were able to design and build those features. So it's definitely a difficult space to be in from a software perspective.
Yeah, and I think it's tough. Kurt, did you want to jump in?
Yeah, I was just gonna, can you guys hear me okay?
Yeah.
Yeah, thanks.
By the way, just to introduce myself to the people, I work in business development within the localization aspect of life sciences and healthcare, biotechnology, and the data management tools are something that we also work on where as far as software and
Yeah.
translation as well. I did, I'm kind of curious for Chris and Heather, but also anybody else on the call. Since we're living in the age of COVID, has there been like an onslaught of the need for this data management? Because again, there's so much going on with clinical trials, medical devices being needed, innovation is taking place, and all that data needs to be managed somehow and centralized and aggregated and then shared. Has there been kind of this overwhelming need of saying, hey, company A through company Z needs these new tools. How can you help us? I mean, has that been going on lately?
Yeah. I mean, definitely on tools to help them actually continue running studies, whether that's a CRO that's trying to help their sponsors keep their studies running, or a sponsor who may do this in-house. Trying to either start up or continue a study. So, they've been looking for ways to continue running studies. In particular, how can they do remote monitoring, because they can't send their monitor to the site to actually, do the data reconciliation against the data that's been entered into the study versus what the site has in their either paper records or in their EMR. That's one side of it. The other side is, how can they keep patients enrolled in a study if they can't, if they're reluctant to go to their site for a visit, if they have to have blood drawn or something like that, how can they move that to the patient's home? And so there's been a tremendous increase in CROs looking for tools to facilitate this. On our side, one way that we facilitate the remote monitoring piece is we can designate questions in our ECRFs that are tagged non-clinical data. So it's more operational information that we want to gather from the site, which could include redacted PDFs of the source documentation. So the site can actually provide that as a redacted PDF, which the monitor would then use remotely to compare the data in the database versus what was in the redacted PDF, and then generate their queries and questions from that. And then, you know, companies, there's a few of them, but companies like PCM Trials, they've seen a huge uptake in their services. They're the ones that have the remote nurses that can go on site, phlebotomists and so on, that can go into the patient's home and perform the what would normally be a visit in the clinic. They can actually perform all of those tests in the patient's home, and then, you know, record either on a tablet or a laptop any of the data that would normally be collected by the coordinator at the site for that visit. So their business has been booming. So yeah, definitely, you know.
Yeah, and it definitely, and it's impacting trial design as well. You know, we work on a lot of different types of trials, and we do have COVID trials as well. And the way that the study has to be designed and how the data is being captured, it's tough because particularly COVID patients that are very sick are in the hospital, most likely. They could be in ICU. We're looking at a different group of coordinators that are not necessarily the ones that are doing sort of, maybe it's an oncology trial and you've planned ahead and you know you have the patient coming in, and it's very sort of, it's methodical, and they have the time to sit down and put the data in. And some of the things we've had to iterate on is how are we making that data entry process a lot more flexible for those folks that are on the ground and working with these patients. So thinking about how we're adding new functionality into the design of the acceptance of data. So it might not need to be mandatory. It might need to be sort of, we're going to let them miss a lot of the data, but we're going to want to report on that in a different way and make sure that we're really, you know, firing off triggers to say that, you know, this is missing, that's missing, that's missing, but we understand they're in that sort of urgent environment, and we're going to want to collect that CRF data at some point, but how can we be flexible? And if it is missing, how do we sort of early identify it is missing, but this is an explanation why, and kind of eliminate the query loop. So there's a lot of interesting things even in the data capture side about how we're working with the data to make it a lot more fluid in this environment. I think that's going to transfer out even once we get past COVID studies into how data is being entered and then reviewed and worked on to try and make it easier ultimately for the sites, and then also obviously to make it more impactful for a sponsor, faster and easier.
Good points. It's true.
Thank you for commenting on that. I can see a tremendous amount of data coming through right now with kind of like what we're dealing with. So it's good points.
Yeah, and to Heather's point, you know, we hope we have a vaccine fairly soon, and in, you know, best case scenario, we crush this thing and everything kind of goes back to normal. But on the off chance that it doesn't, you know, I think the way in which clinical trials are designed and run are going to be fundamentally changed. And that also means that the way the protocols themselves are written are going to fundamentally change. So to Heather's point, I think you're going to see protocols written where a lot more of the data that's being gathered is optional, and they're leaning more on statisticians to figure out how to fill in the gaps, or, you know, or increasing the volume of patients in a study, you know, to cover those gaps. So I think that's going to change dramatically right now.
Yeah, and the patient responsiveness is having them involved in this process. There was sort of a theme last year, it felt like, that really kind of bubbled up, maybe sort of the last 18 months, which was sort of this sort of patient centricity, which is hugely important. And then all of a sudden COVID hit, and that seems to be, it's hard to mesh that with just, we really need to figure out how to make this happen. And it'll be interesting to see over the next, I think, sort of 6 to 24 months, how we circle back to that, because COVID has forced so many innovations in the getting the work done piece. I think it's going to translate into some really interesting things from a data management tool perspective when it comes to how we interact with patients. That's exciting because that patient piece is so important, and it's been sorely lacking for a very long time.
Yeah. I think we're going to see, you know, I know it's a buzz phrase, but telemedicine. It's, you know, being able to have a physician or the investigator, you know, speak with a patient in their home versus in the clinic, and even be able to do assessments. So I know there is I cannot remember the study name, but it's a U.S. study, FDA approved, where they were able to get a protocol approved where they're able to do gait analysis assessments through a teleconference. So they were able to come up with a software algorithm that could actually process the patient's walking and doing certain tests, and then it would generate a score in terms of the patient's ability to, or their mobility, basically. And that's being run now. And the reason they went that route is they had to, again, COVID struck and they couldn't do the study traditionally. So I don't know how long it took them to do it, but they paused, rewrote the protocol, and came up with this novel way of doing this, this gait analysis that was normally done in clinic. And now they're running the trial. So we're going to see a lot of that stuff going on.
Well, and it speaks to what we were talking about earlier, which is sort of that mindset of what would be the ideal scenario and can we make it happen? And in the data management tool area, there is a bit of a divide, I think, between platforms and technology companies that are sort of, you get what you get, and if you purchase what we give you, that's what you get, and you know what it is, and it's well known, and that's where you are. There's a framework, there's a square around it. This is the box. And then there are companies that want to keep innovating and kind of make it a little bit different in what they're doing over time. And we were talking a little bit about the process of kind of selecting companies and figuring out how to put together the team that you want to work with, and it's a challenge because everyone in our industry, I think, from an eClinical technology platform, kind of always sounds the same. You know, everybody says they do all the things that you might want if you're checking the box on what kind of platform you're looking for, and it takes a bit of a deeper dive to get into the weeds. And I think what's happening right now is going to make a lot of those differentiators a lot more clear.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. I don't know, and I don't want to put anybody on the spot, but Anna, you come from a operations side of things in terms of working on the sponsor side in oncology trials. Don't feel like you have to jump in, but I mean, if you have any comments or anything to do with your experience from the sponsor side on sort of data management platforms or anything, we'd love to hear from you. Don't feel like you have to, though.
Yeah, I mean, just off the top of my head, one of the things actually I was thinking about was, so the study I'm working on, it's actually run in lots of different countries.
Mm-hmm.
And sometimes I feel, there can become this like communication issues in terms of how, queries are sent to site and them understanding it. I just wondered, do you have experience of any kind of translation of databases or anything like that?
It was funny, we were actually talking to a client about that today because we were talking about they didn't expect to, but because of COVID, things are challenging in the US right now, so they're having to launch some sites in Latin America. And did they want to do translation and sort of what was going to happen around that? And the platform we have, we can do translation based on sort of the on-screen as well as the entry. So it's fully adaptable to that. And there was a lot of internal discussion with their team about translation and the challenges around that of having to sort of translate and translate back. And it's a really challenging area right now because it's very expensive to do it well. And the platform can be a limiting factor for that. Chris, I don't know, I think you might want to jump in here.
Yeah, and I'm definitely going to lean on Kurt because this is Kurt's world in terms of translation. The static pieces that Heather touched on where, we've translated the ECRFs into 3 or 4 languages or our user interface into 3 or 4 languages. It's difficult because it's clinical, but that's kind of the easy part where Anna, what you're getting at is even more complex because it's in real time. You're an English speaker first, and you may be communicating with a Spanish site where English is their second language, and you're issuing a query in your language in English, and it's difficult for them to either understand it correctly or the responses back may not be easily understood on your part. Kurt, any thoughts on that?
Yeah, to Heather's point, Yeah, it is to have the proper translations or transcreation, as some people will put that. It can be expensive, especially in the fact that we're dealing with human aspects when it comes to clinical trials, biotechnology, medical devices. Those have to be spot on translations correct, because you're dealing with, if I can just put it bluntly, you're dealing with life or death sometimes
Yeah.
when you're dealing with translations. So yeah, I mean, traditional is steps is called TEP, which is translation, editing, and then proofing. The top companies, or just majority companies, that have like a good representation of linguists or subject matter experts. Excuse me, I have a helicopter going over me right now. I'm sitting in my backyard.
No worries. It's probably putting out a fire.
Yeah, I mean, you're doing multiple steps to integrate human aspects as far as translation, and you do have some AI technology or neural technology to actually increase the efficiency of getting usually the first step done, where you run it through a pass and get that done as far as the first pass of translation through computerized assistance, machine translation, and then you have the human aspect that comes in and proofs that and changes that dynamic, especially also for sometimes when you're dealing with patient material. You start out with a source that's very complex, and it's maybe, let's say it's in English, and then the objective is to translate or transcreate that into, say, another language, but you want to maybe focus on maybe a particular audience, and maybe you need to make it more simplified. So it kind of depends on what your objective is. For example, doing patient pamphlets, material, maybe your target audience, again, Portuguese, maybe it's Japanese, but you want to simplify the message to a certain reading level. So then you have to kind of transcreate the, going from a literal translation into a transcreated so that it makes sense, but on a certain reading level. So there's all these different, like you're saying, check boxes you have to kind of figure out when you've got a project. And then when you introduce, machine translation, human aspects, it can be expensive, but that's the best way to go. And that's the standard right now in the industry, even though machine translation technology has grown so much over the past 10 years, we're not quite there yet. So
it was funny. I got that's a good point, Kurt. I got a little notice in the mail with a package I purchased the other day, and it had a whole bunch of information from the company, and it was an overseas company, so it was a translation. You could tell, because it basically said, if you're not happy with the project, with this product, throw us an email. And I laughed because I was like, throw us an email. It's a perfect example of translation being literally correct, but also for the absorber of the information, obviously hilariously slightly incorrect, but wonderfully so. But we don't have that. We can't afford that industry that we're in. Yeah, throw us an email.
Yeah, the slang is a big deal too. I mean, I would say we don't see that too much in the clinical trial area. Thank God, because that would be really problematic.
We can't.
You can't do that. Yeah, you're dealing with medical technical terms. It's all straight business. So that's why, it does take time. It is somewhat expensive because, again, the nature of what you're dealing with humans and procedures, technology revolving around many different aspects of the medical world. So yeah, you really have to be careful. Got to do it right. So
it could take a few days to wrangle a query on something, which I can appreciate, Anna, when you brought that up about, something that's urgent and important, that's hugely significant. And what we do is, I mean, we facilitate the process, but we certainly aren't on the sort of CRO or the sponsor side that are managing that translation piece. We can make recommendations if we're asked, but for the most part, we're not involved in that. But from a technology platform perspective, it's an interesting point to think about, because we can translate, we do queries, we do all that back and forth of data, but thinking about how to integrate, making it easier to do faster real-time translations would be kind of a neat idea. I don't know if we've gone down that rabbit hole, but that's a cool thing you brought up, Anna, because that's the neat thing for us to think about.
Yeah, and the only way that I have seen, companies, whether it's a CRO sponsor or data management company, kind of overcome that real-time piece is by contracting with a translation company that can do simultaneous translation.
Yep.
Right now, is that feasible to help someone write a query in Spanish? Like explain it in Spanish? I'm not sure, potentially, but I have seen, companies rely on internal resources, someone where Spanish is a second language, or maybe it was even their first language, or Chinese for that matter, Mandarin, try and resource that skill set internally. But not everyone has that. So I can definitely see that not only now being a problem, but definitely more in the future. Um,
Yeah, because AI is not there. It's just not yet.
no, and
It's
to
going to be some years.
yeah,
Yeah.
to Kurt's point, if you're having a conversation, it might not need to be that quite that accurate, but in terms of the clinical data, it needs to be spot on,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
There's there isn't any room for error. And I think it's just going to get worse, like more complicated by that. By that, I mean, we, in the last 3 days, well, yeah, since Monday, we've had inquiries from a CRO in Lebanon, in Cairo, in Egypt, a CRO in Mexico, and one in the UK, because they're also being forced to draw a much wider net in terms of their capabilities, because as COVID's been spreading around various populations, they've had to adapt their trials and look at opening sites or using technology in other regions. So their existing trials are morphing, and everyone's kind of scrambling now to find other resources to help them with what they're doing. Even monitoring, some regions are able to do monitoring. So we do work with a monitoring company out of Florida, and suddenly a good chunk of their business shifted to Canada because, we
don't
have more
the same
access. We're
volume.
not as
Yeah, we have
locked
more
down
access right
anymore.
now. Yeah.
So the trials that they were engaged in, it was a bit of a cascade, but the CROs worked with the sponsor to bring on Canadian sites. Now that they've got Canadian sites going, they're getting data. Now they've got to get the monitoring in. So in particular, in one case, it was a few sites in Quebec, and so French as a first language was critical for the monitors that they needed, and the good folks over at the company in Florida don't speak French. So
Yeah, and it's just it's a pressure that's just a gas on pushing the cracks of how existing processes were. And every company's feeling it to a different extent. And the question is it a pressure on a crack that is going to break and we got to fix, or a pressure on a crack that we can put a Band-Aid over, or where is it coming? But everyone's feeling it. And we're from a data management perspective, we're seeing some really interesting shifts in how people are needing to adapt really, really quickly with new features, new functions, like, can we do this? Can we do that? Because if we can't do it with the technology to get a handle on the data, then we're going to have to do a whole bunch of other things with other people and the environment that we're working in. So what we're trying to do is sort of adapt as much as we can to help with those things. But it's interesting to see how those pressures are kind of being put on everyone right now, and all those cracks are being realized. I mean, people are feeling that with the education system, with the health system, and sort of forcing this sort of ramp up of change, which is exciting, but also a little confusing, I think, for a lot of people. But it's good. It's going to be good. I mean, it's unfortunate the reason why, but I think we're going to be 20 years ahead of where we are now 2 years from now than we might have been if this hadn't happened. So.
Oh yeah, for those for the vendors that are involved in clinical research, for those that actually embrace and adopt these what you want to call emerging technologies like telemedicine, they're going to see a huge uptake in the number of programs they're working on, because even the holy grail for clinical research outside of the pandemic was, how can we increase the patient populations that we're pulling into a clinical trial, yet while reducing the cost? So if you can, get patients enrolled that don't need to be next door to one of the investigational sites, then you can suddenly draw on a much larger patient population.
Which will also diversify the patient population, which is hugely important. And
Also,
people are starting to
unmanageable
realize,
problem.
yeah. So, I mean, and ultimately giving access, what we're all here for, which for the most part generally tends to be the case, is got into the industry because we want to find a way to help people and try and find a way to, you know, bring new things to market that are going to help people. So it's an interesting pressure that will, I think, hopefully soon, or is starting to give more access to these opportunities to patients that might otherwise have not had it.
Yeah.
Which is exciting.
Oh, I'm thrilled. Like, I mean, we come from the technology side. So for us, you know, anything that's innovative is great. And we get frustrated when we see software that's antiquated and not moving forward quickly. You know, we just shake our head at it in disbelief. So, you know, seeing this stuff, seeing the adoption increasing and the number of companies that are releasing technology is very, very exciting.
For sure.
I am interested.
Something I want to point out.
Hey,
Sorry.
no, yeah, go for it.
Yeah. So, what's your point? What's your point of view about the speed of current clinical trials? Because we are talking about speeding up the clinical trial, vaccine, you know, antibody development, but it looks like there are lots of, you know, obstacles on you know, in the past. So what can we do, like in terms of, especially related to the data management side? Any suggestion, any, you know, improvement?
You know, that's a great question. And, you know, I think everyone, first of all, I think they will find a vaccine. You know, I think it's not going to be easy. You know, the ones that are being run under the FDA, I think, you know, the FDA is despite cutting some red tape, they're hell bent on sticking to their process, which is important, obviously, from a safety perspective. And I think, you know, I think they have to rely a little bit more on early signals, you know, early data. You know, the study, I can't remember who it was, Moderna, the one in the UK where they stopped it because they had an adverse event. They had a serious event. You know, that's refreshing. It's unfortunate they had to stop it, but it's nice. It's good to see that they did, because they need to make sure that, you know, what they're producing is safe. So I think, you know, relying on the data that they are getting and maybe, you know, powering it with the statisticians to see if they can get earlier signals earlier is the only way that they can kind of get these things approved quickly.
Yeah, and there's also a lot about, and we're, you know, we've got a lot of different clients we work with, and in some cases, you know, when we start, the first time we work with a company that maybe has used a platform that's different than ours, that might not be as flexible, there's a lot of sort of assumption that they will end up having to do a lot of things manually, and that a lot of the sort of edit checks, and talking about what Chris was saying about sort of signals and seeing trends in the data, that a lot of that is still sort of kind of snailing along after the data that's being collected in the database and actually being interacted with from a technology perspective, and having those sort of electronic checks and notifications and things. And I think that companies that are more willing to adopt a very open mind to say, let's really say, what can we do with the technology we can get, and how can we transition that, and not to eliminate the human piece, but to give that human piece more insight with their own oversight, will make a difference. Because, you know, if you've got a study where half your edit checks you just assume are going to be based on, you know, manual checks between really complex things, because you don't realize the data platform can do that, it's just going to take time. And if you don't have enough bodies on that, the time could be 2 weeks, 3 weeks before somebody says, oh, bing, that's a thing that's a problem, or that's a thing that's a really good signal. Then you put yourself behind the scenes. So I think there's a lot about that sort of adoption policy that people have in their companies to say, how do we push the envelope on what we can do with the technology we have, so that we're not waiting for a human to do it? We don't want to eliminate the humans, because they're way better in really understanding nuances, but we want to give them as much advantage as we can. And I think that I think that in time of COVID, that's going to be something where the companies that really push forward and can start advancing things quickly are going to be the ones who take advantage of those tools and don't just have that mindset that what we've always done is worked good enough. It'll be
We'll
fine.
just do it that way again. Yeah, and I would take it one step further, and I'm sure, you know, the Modernas and the Pfizers and the AstraZenecas running some of these vaccine trials have done this, but you know, question all of their assumptions, not just some of them. You know, so obviously they got fast approvals from the FDA, but you know, all of their internal processes for writing the protocol, you know, all the departments working on the study, you know, have them question everything they're doing and look for those blockers that are slowing them down, and see if there are ways in which they can eliminate those blockers. Normally, under regular circumstances, it might not be a problem, but if you're trying to do something 3 times as quickly, suddenly those things may be issues that can be better solved either through technology, or can they skip it entirely? You know, can the regulatory group approve us not doing this part of the process that we would normally do, right? So just question everything to see if they can streamline as much of it as possible.
Yeah, you want to be safe, absolutely, 100%. But there's also a lot of the mindset around a lot of the sort of on paper process that isn't necessarily going to get you where you want to go as quickly as it could. So there's a lot of things out there that a lot of companies don't know about, and it's exciting to kind of think about. Unfortunately, the pressure is from where it is, but the pressure is going to bring those things to light, and good things are going to come from it, which is cool.
Yeah, and I mean, I you know, having, you know, worked on the studies that we have over the years, for you know, for them to compress what at its best might be a 3-year cycle to get any product approved, let alone a vaccine. Vaccines are usually 5 to 10 years. To do that in 12 months to 18 months is just astronomically amazing. Like that, it's amazing they can do that.
Yeah, it will be fascinating once it's all done and said, that to see what comes of it and what processes were used and what will that mean?
Yeah.
What will that mean for what's going to happen in the future of our industry? But that's cool stuff for data nerds. It's cool stuff. It's unfortunate the reason, but it's neat to see it happening.
Yeah, and I'm curious. I know Russia has approved their vaccine. Does anybody know if they have released the data that supported the approval?
I haven't seen that.
I have not heard.
I have heard some news. They released some data, but not complete data. Should be
because
some data.
you know, because I think none of us mind where and who creates the vaccine. If it works, it works, right? So I'm curious to see if they have science behind it and it's actually safe, then I would love to see that stuff get peer reviewed, because I mean, we need it. It'll benefit everybody.
Yeah, they skip clinical trial to phase 2 and 3. So they probably only did very initial trial.
So I thought they just skipped 3.
They didn't do 2 and 3.
They kind of did a 1 hybrid 2 and said, let's go for it.
It didn't kill anybody, so it's approved.
They tested only about, I heard it's about 60, 70 people.
What?
I didn't know they approved it on that few. That's a Wild West right there.
All right, never mind. I have no faith in that one yet.
I'm out.
No, I sorry. I was under, I mean, it's approved according to the Russians, but I was under the impression they had tested at least a few thousand to tens of thousands of like frontline workers and things like that.
What do you think about the safety about the vaccine that is under development of clinical trials phase 3, like Pfizer one and other? I heard there are totally 9 trials.
You know, I know I have faith they're going to be safe. There's particularly with vaccines, there's enough skepticism as it is. Those companies can't afford to contribute to an increase in skepticism. And so that's why they've all banded together and petitioned the FDA and whoever else that, you know, they just can't skip the process. You know, they've got to make sure that they do it and that they get, you know, I guess the you know, the population's confidence that the thing is safe. You know, I think it's still low. I can't remember what the numbers were, but there was some polling done on, you know, who would take the vaccine, you know, and it was still fairly low, 30, 40%.
70, 75 or something like that percent maybe said they would.
Yeah, and it's going like this as the weeks go by and data is being released and you know who they're listening to.
And
So,
we're chasing that's not going to be 100%. We're not talking about getting an MMR and a polio vaccine, all that kind of stuff, and saying, you know, you're not going to get it. We're chasing a vaccine that, because it's in this tight time frame, 70, 80%, 87%, wherever it might be, this is not a perfect. This is a stopgap that's going to grow over time. And so if they had to chase, you know, we're going to get 98% accuracy on this thing and it's not going to let anybody get sick, it would be that longer time frame, and not as long as it would be, but they're chasing something that's going to be you'll get it, it won't make you sick, it's going to give you a much better chance, it's going to let us all get a little bit more safety and security here, but it's not going to be perfect.
No, and you know, it's enough to buy us some time to continue working on a much broader, you know, stronger vaccine, because unfortunately it's mutating. It's going through our population so quickly that it's mutating fairly quickly.
I agree. Time is everything now.
Yeah, but I agree. They definitely have to follow through on the standard process, because otherwise it puts, you know, the vaccine in jeopardy. It puts other vaccines in jeopardy, and it diminishes the confidence that the public has in the FDA. I mean, so many other countries follow the FDA as in terms of, like, they mirror their guidelines, right? You know, breaking that process just to solve this problem in the short term and taking on that much risk is a terrible thing. So I think even though you know, the governments want to move as quickly as possible, I think the pharma companies are going to stick to their process as best they can, and let the science lead them, you know.
Fingers crossed, knock on wood.
Yeah. Well, and then, you know, and we, you know, all the talk is about the vaccines, but I mean, we're working on projects right now that are on the therapeutic side.
Huge.
And there's so many, you know, so yes, the vaccine's important, but you know, if there are therapeutics, particularly with inflammation and respiratory, that can prevent you from having to go on a ventilator and dying, then that's also important, right? Like you might get sick, but it you know, if there's the right therapeutic, it won't kill you. And so those are equally important.
Yeah, it's a lot. It's a lot. We live in interesting times.
Yes, and what from a data perspective, what I really want to see happening more of right now is aggregating all of the data, because there are obviously, unfortunately, a lot of positive patients. You know, aggregating some baseline set of data across all of these sites, and allowing institutions to evaluate that data en masse, because the virus is causing so many other complications, and obviously the more data that they have to work with, the better insights they can have. And you know, when you look at across gender and race and age, there are so many different ways it's impacting those groups, and we're just scratching the surface on it, and still right now a lot of it's still anecdotal. You know, it's not just, they haven't had access to enough data to really look at it from a science perspective. So that, I think, is something that needs to happen as well.
Oh, it's going to be huge. This is not the only one. I mean, it's the first of others that will happen. It's not going to happen. And there's so much to learn. And I think from a therapeutic perspective, hopefully we can learn a lot about, I mean, the long-term effects that people are starting to see. I mean, 6 months, right? It's not been a very long time. There's going to be, if we can bring, and I mean, like you were saying about data, if we can bring all the data together in a way that's going to let technology as well as humans work together to data mine for really, really useful information, the better it'll be. This is an interesting industry that's so far advanced in what we do in health, but tends to be very siloed when it comes to how we handle data.
Yeah, and there, you know, between countries, there's still, you know, a reluctance to collaborate. In science, it's a little bit better, but in this case, there's a lot of walls that went up, you know, and I think we can definitely do a better job in responding to it if there's more collaboration between countries at the science level. So I think hopefully, you know, we'll see this change even as this particular pandemic evolves. But in terms of planning for the next one, hopefully there's you know, better lessons learned, documented, and processes that are there, and that are then followed afterwards when they have to be. Yeah.
True.
Any questions from you guys? Hiba, Anna, Kurt, Jan?
I think I'm good. This has been some good talking points. I appreciate inviting me and giving me the opportunity to just kind of listen in and provide my little 2 cents on this discussion. But yeah, thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome, and thank you for joining, Kurt. The part you got me thinking about is real-time translation, even if it's just conversational between the site and sponsor, the site and CRO.
Yeah.
I know, and you guys can laugh at me. I don't know if it works well or not, but I know Skype has that real-time translation, even if it's conversational. It'd be interesting to see something like that integrated within an eClinical platform, so that if you had to do a call with a site, that there was at least some basic translation happening in real time. That would be interesting.
Yeah, the closest thing, I mean, there is technology that does support that from a software perspective. That I can't think of any names off the top of my head right now, but the other substitute that has been working very well and that has been booming right now has been real-time interpretation and translation over by video and by phone, and some face-to-face with some obviously social distancing that's involved, but that has been booming quite a bit lately.
Yeah. So anyway, food for thought on my part.
Yeah, thanks for bringing that up, Anna. That was a good one. It's really interesting to think about. Yeah.
Awesome.
Good discussion. Lots of you know, very good topics, and I really think the point of you know, after this COVID, probably reduce the paper paper gathering data, and become more computerized and more validated.
Absolutely.
Like the system, yeah. So that'll also be more efficient and can speed up the clinical trial.
Yeah.
That's an area.
It's a huge area. Yeah. The paper pushing, there's a lot of that still happening.
Yeah, that's still today. There's still a lot of paper. It's incredible. We definitely need to get rid of some of this paper. Excellent. Anna, Hiba, thank you so much for joining. Feel free to connect with us on LinkedIn. You know, we're there. And if you want to join us for the next one in October, what month is it? October. Yeah, we'll hopefully we'll see you there.
Yeah, thank you so much. It was really, really interesting discussion.
You're welcome. Yeah. All right. I think we're done. It's almost the hour.
All right. Well, yeah, it was so nice to get to hear all your stories and get to know you a little bit. And hope to see you another time. And, you know, we do these things sort of casually and on the fly a little bit, and we pick a topic. But, you know, if you guys know anybody who's interested in talking about this stuff or have any questions or things, and people you think are great subject matter experts for something like this, we're always interested in meeting new folks who might want to join us as a guest speaker, or you know, have a topic that's really interesting to you that we could cover. Let us know. We'd love to connect on LinkedIn, and like I said, we and Chris said, we just like to keep this sort of informal but as informative as it can be.
Yep. Perfect. All right.
Thank you, Chris and Heather. Thank you very much.
You're welcome. Good night, guys.
Bye, guys.
Bye.
Thanks for joining us. Bye.
Bye.